Yes. Hello, my beautiful friends. It is an amazing day and welcome back. We have a very exciting stream in store for us tonight because it is debate night, baby. J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz going to be debating. And we're going to go through it tonight. I'm pretty excited about this one. I think it's going to be a nice opportunity for J.D. Vance to introduce himself to huge portions of America that have not met this guy yet, that have been only understanding J.D. through the lens of the media, and they've spent, $1 billion to make him look like a bad guy. Now they're going to see who he actually is, and it's going to be a very nice contrast to put him up side by side with Tim Walz. And so we're excited about going through it all today. Very glad that you're here and with us. There are many places you could be watching this tonight. And of course, glad that you're spending it here with us. We're very glad to have you here. We've got some other business to attend to. Before this puppy gets underway, I want to brief on some late Trump filings that just came out of the oven. It's October 1st. It's a fresh new quarter out there. Hopefully your Q3 was great and your Q4 is going to be even better because we're going to have a victory in November. It's going to be a lot of fun. But let's see what's cooking over at CBS. Of course, we're going to come back here and check out what they're up to. But this is the live feed. You see the countdown timer ticking away.
He talked about Republicans being weird.
And here is what the feed sounds like.
But he also talked a lot about joy and how Kamala Harris brings joy to the ticket. A lot of people
joy?
Don't know all that joy.
I think some people might call it hystericism and lunacy, but they call it joy. A lot of joy in insane asylums, but, we don't really want all to be governed by the lunatics who are there. But the debate is coming up. We're going to be covering it. We're glad that you're here and joining us. A little bit of a preview of what we're talking about today. So last week, we saw that Jack Smith officially declared that he was going to be filing his Trump book report that was going to be smearing him because they're not going to have their trial before the election occurs. And we briefly touched on it, this filing, because we had our friend Joseph Sweeney, ex-CIA lawyer, come by. If you missed that interview, it was awesome, and this book is awesome. Joseph B. Sweeney came by. We spoke with him on Friday, and we had a quick update on this filing. We'll go through it again just to refresh our recollection on it. But what's more interesting is Trump's response. So Trump submitted this today, and it is a short response to this, and they're opposing Jack's little maneuver here. And what's so interesting about this filing is they're actually going through and they're saying, hey, Jack, buddy boy, you said that we can't have conversations about witnesses in this case. You remember that Trump is gagged in the January 6th case because they said if he talks about witnesses or if he talks about evidence, Judge Chutkin is saying, we're all going to die. Witnesses are going to get murdered in their sleep every night if Trump talks about the evidence in the case. And so now we're all asking ourselves, well, that's really weird. If that is true, if Trump talks about witnesses and they're all going to immediately die, well, how come Jack Smith can talk about them? That's weird. How can he publish a whole 180-page, quadruple the size of the standard filing book report dossier that's going to smear Trump and have witness evidence and all sorts of identifying materials in there that are very sensitive and so on and so forth? How can that be the same if he's so concerned? Well, obviously it is logically inconsistent. Their story changes as needed to suit them. That's how they operate because they have no real commitment to justice or any honor at all. So we'll talk about it. So you'll see this is Trump's response. We'll read through it. We'll make sure we get through it in time. It's not too long, so we give ourselves some time to update on what's cooking in debate land, because this is apparently what the scene looks like outside there in New York. CBS Studios is where they're at. And there's a lot of Trump flags out there. Is that Chinese American for Trump? Shout out to our Chinese Americans who are there in support of Trump. So we'll do a little bit of a debate preview because there were some other clips that are out and about. J.D. Vance is on the way to the arena for the debate. This is what Trump Jr. posted On the way to the debate with my man, J.D. Vance. Let's go, baby. It's party time. It's about to be hot. J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz. But Trump was also out and about, and he got asked some questions about J.D. Vance and an interview that Trump is not going to be doing with 60 Minutes. So Trump is explaining why he will not be sitting down with them, and he wants an apology. He deserves one. And then Trump posted this, a very nice little montage of J.D. Vance. And so we'll watch this highlight reel for J.D. Vance in the run-up to the debate, and then we'll be here to get into it together with CBS Mornings. Oh, gosh. All right, so as you can see, we've got a bunch of good stuff to get to today, my friends. Before we get into any of it, we want to ask a question of you, and an important one. Have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? You remember him? This guy right here. Remember him? Chuck Norris. Amazing dude. Well, I recently saw a video that he made, and I was shocked. He's in his 80s, and he's still kicking butt, and he's working out, and he's staying active. Now, what's even more shocking is he's stronger, and he can work out longer, even with plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. Now, he did this by making one change. He says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this too, and she's never felt better either. She says she feels 10 years younger. Her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. Chuck made a special video that explains everything. Now, I want to make sure you watch it. Go check it out. It's linked down in the description below at chuckdefense.com/RG. Click on the link. It's right there on your screen too. And you're going to go watch this video. It's going to be amazing. 84 years old. He's got more energy than me. Roundhouse kicking and everything. He discovered that he could create dramatic changes by simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Very simple. Watch this method, his method. Click the link. It's going to take you to this page. And just go watch the video. That's all you have to do. Just watch the video. Chuck Norris, man. He's awesome. All right, so check it out. Thanks for supporting our sponsor, and go to chuckdefense.com/RG to watch that video. You're going to love it. All right, so now, one more thing. Before we get to this, before we get into the recent Trump filings, I want to make a big plug to have you come and join us this Friday for the Defending Democracy Conference. All right, your boy has been invited to speak at this, and I'm excited about it. So I'll be on at 10:15 my time, which if you do the calculation, subtract the 5s and the 3s, should be about 1:15 East Coast time, probably. Somebody double check my math. So Defending Democracy, it's this Friday. I'd love to have you come join us. You got to go and make a donation to get a ticket. But this is a great organization, okay? I've been working with them. I spoke here last year, whenever the last one was, and it's a lot of fun. Let me show you. It's not just me who's going to be on this agenda. It's all day Friday. Here is an overview of the sessions from like 7:20 in the morning all the way through the whole day. There's going to be amazing people talking about democracy, Democrats, and the war against Jews is here. Democrats' disdain for election laws, the Trump assassination attempts, and so on, right? It's all full day, full calendar, and your boy is going to be speaking right here for Lawfare, all right? Hey, that's me. Look at that. Robert Gouveia right there. So the link is in the description. Joseph Sweeney, we're sharing this slot together, so I'll be speaking half, he'll be speaking the other half. And it is this Friday, and so I'd love to have you come join us. Dylan Law Group is going to be there. Look at all these people who are going to be there. So, for example, if you scroll down here, you'll see, what's up? Rachel Alexander, you know who she is. She's amazing. We've got Daniel Street, awesome. Reggie Littlejohn, Jesse Franklin Murdoch. John Eastman, you know who he is. He used to represent Trump in several legal matters, including 2020. John Eastman's going to be there. So come on over, come join us. Remember, Joe Sweeney, the gentleman for ex-CIA lawyer, he's going to be there. So come on over. The link is down in the description below. I'd really like to have you come join us. I think it's a really good organization. This guy, David, is working his butt off to put this all together. And it's going to be great. All right. I don't make any money. I'm not, affiliated in that way. Just speaking. And I think what they're doing is good work. And I appreciate what they're doing. They're connecting people together, right? I met Joe Sweeney, who we brought here to this channel through David, and we're getting plugged in. All right. So it's the link is in the description on the channel. You should see it. The second link down in there. And we'll be excited to have you come join us. So you got to go and register and get tickets and all the things, make a donation. and support them because I think they're doing good work. And it's a full day. It's a lot of work to put these things together. So thanks for checking that out. And I'll drop the link in the chats all across the fruited plains if you want to join us. That would be awesome to have you join us. Let me drop that. There we go. All right. So, yeah, we're going to get on with the show. But it's an important one because it's going to be a good event. It's happening this Friday. All right. Now, let's get to it. Thank you for indulging. Let's get to it because we do have some good stuff. Donald Trump is rubbing Jack Smith's nose in his own words. Remember that in the January 6th case, Jack Smith wanted Trump gagged, did not want him to talk about witnesses and evidence. None of this could come out on the public record or otherwise witnesses will die and America will be over because of Trump's big mouth, was Jack Smith's argument. And it's really what Judge Chutkan bought when she gagged him. But now, for some interesting reason, Jack Smith's entire strategy has changed. And now he wants all of that evidence put on the public docket. He wants to write it in a big, disgusting dossier. And he wants to make that public so that they can smear Trump because they're not going to have a trial before the election because they goofed their case. Forgot about that little concept called immunity that has functionally existed for 234 years until Jack Smith came into town. So now Jack has filed under seal a bunch of stuff, and he's telling Judge Chutkan that she should publish a huge swath of it, and it's up to her to make a decision on how to do that. And so Jack submitted this into the D.C. court, and he was saying, okay, guess what, Your Honor? I, as the prosecutor, the special counsel, will be filing all of this stuff, and it's going to include a bunch of stuff. Grand jury testimony, materials obtained through sealed search warrants, transcripts, reports of witness interviews, materials obtained from other government entities, and so on. And so we want to file this under seal, and so that you can take a look at what's in here, Judge, and then we'll publish a redacted copy of the motion on the public docket once we decide what can be published and not published. And then he goes through and he says, there's going to be a bunch, okay? The filing is going to be huge. It's like 180 pages. And he explained that he's got the right to do this, and the court can go through these various factors and make a decision on what's appropriate to unseal and not unseal. Now, Trump's people are saying, hold on, okay, not so fast. They've responded in an objection to Jack Smith's sealing motion. They're saying, you can't do this, Jack. There's a whole slew of logical inconsistencies here, buddy boy. Here's what Trump's defense wrote. President Trump, Your Honor, Judge Chutkan, January 6th case, respectfully submits this opposition to Jack's proposed redactions and all of this whole process in their motion for so-called motion for immunity determinations, which they have restyled in an unsuccessful effort to mask the fact that there is no basis in federal criminal procedure or in the Constitution for filing something that attempts to usurp control and presentation of a defendant's defense in a criminal case. So he's saying that this is an environment where they're trying to create a trial in public filings on the court docket. But everything in our system is designed to prevent that from happening. So they're saying, well, what are we going to call this? We're going to call it an opening brief, and we're going to call it a motion for immunity determinations, okay, which doesn't exist, is what they're saying. And in this new label, you know how much they like to invent labels. Like, well, what do you want to identify this motion as? I don't know. Well, it's clearly an illegal motion, but I want to identify it as a legal thing to do. Well, you're Jack Smith. You can identify however you want. Identify the motion however. He says, I know. I'll identify it as an MID. Oh, an MID. Oh, good. He's probably going to put that in his email signature. But it's identified as a motion for immunity determinations. They say, what the hell is that? Never even heard of that. Now, Jack's office recently, and before we continue on this, they're giving us a footnote. They say, look, here, this is exactly what he's doing. Jack's office referred to, for example, in September, earlier this year, last month, referred to presidential immunity filing more aptly. They called it a opening immunity brief, a superfluous opening immunity brief, which is not responsive to any defense motion, right? In other words, Trump is not filing anything that would give them a cause to brief. And it's unnecessary. So he just kind of is making stuff up because the Supreme Court said, well, you have to do something about this. And he says, well, great. So I'll just do it. I guess the Supreme Court gave them license then to file whatever they want on the public docket. It's not exactly how the opinion read. So they continue. Trump's defense says the special counsel's office recently told the court, Chutkan, Jack's team writes, we spent, Your Honor, a considerable amount of time going through a protective order and making sure it could stand time. That was back in September 2024. Now, however, the motion reflects a largely unexplained about face on materials that Jack Smith already designated as sensitive. He said, we can't talk about these things. Now he wants to talk about them. And it also does not adequately address any of the implications for witnesses, jurors, or the integrity of these proceedings. You said earlier when you gagged Trump that if we talked about this, it was going to wreck everything. Now you're reversing that? No, sorry, Judge. The true motivation driving the efforts by Jack Smith, who's illegitimate, by the way, according to Judge Eileen Cannon, to disseminate witness statements that he previously sought to lock down, right? Why does he want to publish all this stuff? He said Trump can't talk about it like a couple months ago, is inappropriate. The office wants their politically motivated manifesto to be public. Jack's manifesto. I am Jack's TDS. Contrary to Justice Manual and longstanding DOJ norms in cases not involving Trump, in the final weeks of the presidential election, while early voting has already begun. I am Jack's burning rage. Having criticized President Trump for, according to the office, trying to litigate this case in the media, remember that? Trump can't talk about this. And improperly press his case in the court of public opinion, their words, they don't want Trump talking about this. You have to be gagged. The office is now seeking to do exactly that, in violation of the very restrictions they previously claimed were essential to, quote, the fair administration of justice. And do you remember, if you were here, we mocked that phrase into oblivion. They could do whatever they want. This was like Kamala's I was born in a middle class statement, whatever happens. Why were you texting that woman? I was born in a middle class. Oh, okay, that's fine. Why don't you go over to her apartment then later? It's the same thing. Sorry, Your Honor. Do you know how fast you were going? You know why I pulled you over? I was born in a middle class. Oh, well, here you go. Sorry to interrupt your day. Here, have my badge and my gun. Have a nice day. It's the same thing. Judge Chutkan can do whatever she wants. Fair administration of justice means it's Chutkan's reality. Constitution goes in the shredder. Now, while the presidential immunity filing contains few, if any, new allegations not already covered in other politically motivated and inaccurate lawfare efforts that Trump opponents have improperly funded and disseminated, right? It's all the same smears in there. It is irresponsible for the prosecutors to so quickly abandon the safety and the privacy interests that they already assigned great weight to in this case and in Florida when they were crying about this. Accordingly, the court should require Jack, illegal, to make consistent redactions regarding identity-related information and show cause why their proposed public disclosure of voluminous, purportedly sensitive materials will not pose a risk to potential witnesses and unfairly prejudice the adjudication of this case. Yeah, what changed? Oh, we know what changed. Your trial's not going to happen before the election. You don't care about gagging or the sanctity, the fair administration of justice. You just care about winning and shutting Trump up. So here's the discussion. They say, look, President Trump has no objection to redacting the names of individuals who are already not specifically identified in this new second draft indictment. However, in numerous instances, the redactions and the pseudonyms proposed by Jack's office fail to meaningfully mitigate the privacy and the safety issues that they've already complained about. This use of functionally impotent redactions, which Jack Smith is familiar with, is flatly inconsistent with the office's approach to other filings here, where they would anonymize ancillary names, right? Elsewhere, they've been anonymizing everything. Now, all of a sudden, they want to reverse course and publicize everything. Therefore, to the extent the court is inclined to grant the identity-related portion of the motion, the office should be required to redact all references to titles and all witnesses and not name them, as this issue repeats itself numerous times in Jack's sprawling manifesto. The burden of applying these redactions should revert to Jack's office, not us. Now, Jack also takes an inconsistent position here. He already said that there were a bunch of sensitive materials. This court issued a protective order gagging Trump and gagging you and me from hearing from Trump, which are summarized and quoted at length in the filing. These materials include grand jury testimony, materials obtained through search warrants, transcripts, witness interviews, materials from government entities. Now, last August, Jack Smith, illegal, came into this court and demanded a protective order that they said was designed to, quote, prevent the improper dissemination or use of discovery materials, including to the public. Jack said, we can't see any of this because we'll all die. Part of the basis for that was harmful chilling effect on witnesses that would wreck the process. And dissemination of that information could adversely affect the fair administration of justice in this case. So Trump can't talk about it. Now, at the hearing related to the protective order, the court acknowledged that and it wasn't about this at all, okay? They just didn't want Trump to talk about the case, which is his right. And he's a defendant in this case. His free speech is his weapon against government corruption. I get so tired of hearing about the prosecutor. Well, we're going to be improperly impugned. So, okay, no, that's the point, is to improperly or to impugn you. That is the point. Properly or improperly, that's up for the jury and the public to decide. But that's our right, is free speech. You don't get to suddenly complain about it. Now, this fair administration of justice stuff or the harmful chilling effect on witnesses, maybe. Then why are you publishing now, Jack, all of it intentionally? At the hearing related to the protective order gagging Trump, the court acknowledged that the affirmative constitutional duty to minimize the effects of harmful, prejudicial pretrial publicity. They don't want a carnival atmosphere. And then they stopped Trump from distributing these sensitive materials. Trump abided by these restrictions for over a year. Yet now, in advance of predictable national news coverage, Jack's office, illegal, seeks to disseminate protected content of these sensitive materials, including direct quotes and summaries, while the gag order restricts Trump. Trump is still gagged, but they can go out and dump these materials all over the place. Jack's office bears the burden of obtaining authorization to disclose this stuff. His office and showing that this issue is unsatisfying at best. They concede that privacy interests at stake are substantial, but they address these issues by saying we'll have some redactions, and they want full redactions of some excerpts. But likewise, in contrast to this motion, Jack's office argued in Florida that even summaries, they said, of likely witness testimony constitute paradigmatic Jenks Act materials, which is a release of materials that should remain out of these are like prior witness statements, prior notes, other reports, things like that. They said this should all remain out of the public. And in a separate filing, they said the same thing: risks, intimidation, harassment, needless, intolerable. Now that public disclosure serves their politically motivated mission, now Jack's office suddenly takes a different view. The office believes that Trump's constitutional right now to impartial jurors in fair proceedings, to say nothing about witness privacy and even safety, all take a backseat to Jack's political goals. Indeed, the office's implicit position is that all of these important considerations must give way to their objective of providing voters across the country immediate access to an unprecedented filing, a monster document with no legal basis, which just so happens to retread all of the false allegations against Trump right as voting starts. How convenient. Contrary to Jack's claim, courts routinely rely on sealed or redacted information to process this stuff. Prosecutors all over this country, including from Jack's office in this very case, regularly seek sealing relief. And there is no legal importance exception cited to justify the protective order. And so for the foregoing reasons, Judge Chutkan should require Jack Smith to make complete, consistent redactions about identity and show cause why this public disclosure of this massive report is consistent with all of their prior complaints about witness safety, juror taint, and the integrity of the proceedings that they whined about when they were gagging Trump. The defense will promptly meet and confer with Jack's office and discuss further redactions on this court's order. Signed by John Lauro, Gregory Singer, Todd Blanche, Emil Bove, on behalf of President Trump. So another good filing there, and we'll see what Jack's response is and what Judge Chutkan ultimately does. She's going to do everything she can to get as much of this in front of the people in the most damaging way possible to impact the election. They're already interfering with the election. They're using an illegal prosecutor, according to Judge Cannon, and millions of our dollars to do it. All right, now let's check in and see what's cooking at the debate. We got 4 minutes and counting.
Days. It's only October 1, but in essence, we've had some surprises. The intensification of the situation in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's getting hot over there. All right, so now as we wait for that to get going, Donald Trump, the president, released the pre-debate montage of J.D. Vance as we warm up for the first historic debate and only debate of the 2024 election season.
We are now just officially
a lot of people
minutes
feel
away from the start of this debate.
Let
I want
me
to get
mute
your
these
final
other guys.
thoughts, Major. I want to start with you.
That did not land the way that I wanted to. Let's do it again.
A lot of people feel like the American dream is further and further away. That if you work hard and play by the rules, it's a little bit harder to get ahead. It's a little bit harder to support a family, a little bit harder to buy a home. The world I grew up in was one where I think for the first time really in American history, my parents' generation did not expect their children to necessarily have a better life than they did. And you saw that in all kinds of different ways, but there was this sense growing up in Middletown in the 1990s that a lot of people didn't expect the future to be better than the past, and that's a really unique and a really tragic thing. The jobs started to disappear from that community, drugs started to move in, hopelessness started to move in, and so a lot of people who really knew that the future would be better than the past actually found a world that was a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging. I wrote Hillbilly Elegy because I wanted to give people a sense of what it was like to live in a community like mine. I didn't think a whole lot of stories were told about white working class Americans. I didn't think a lot of stories were told about people who were struggling with some of the problems we were struggling with, joblessness, drug addiction, and so forth. And I thought that I could tell a story that would make people understand my family a little bit better, and maybe in the process, understand the struggles of a lot of families. I come from the places that I want to represent, and what we need is to stop sending people that are of the DC swamp. We need to send people who are of the places they aim to represent. I want to fight for the people that I come from.
The American media has been laundering foreign disinformation. It is disgusting. Instead of talking about the crises in our country, they try to silence the people who are experiencing them. Who do you want answering the phone? Do you want a person who hides from the friendly American media, or do you want a person who takes a bullet to the head and stands up and says, fight, fight, fight? Kamala Harris, you ought to have respect enough for your own people to enforce their border laws and listen to them. Listen to them when they complain about it. Don't pretend they're bad people. We're not bad people for loving this country. You're a bad person for doing this to the country in the first place.
All right, J.D. Vance in the house. We're excited to hear from him and to see him after it with Tim Walz.
Ed, give
And
us
it
your
looks
last
like
thoughts as we watch here as
Walz
J.D.
is already
Vance
out.
is off in the wings for the moment. Oh, there he is.
Oh, look, they're already out.
It's performance. That seems obvious, but no faux pas. And they're looking for a viral moment.
Well, there we go.
That's what they'll be looking for tonight.
No handshake.
No handshake, and there you have Governor Walz appears to be taking some notes. J.D. Vance doing the same as our colleagues.
And they were shaking hands before the cameras came.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, we have the vice presidential debate
They're already
coming
out.
up in a moment. It will
Okay.
be moderated by our own Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz take the stage. Well, they've taken the stage, so stick with us here and join us also on our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7, for exclusive content you won't see anywhere else. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, like this show right here, this channel. All right, so amazing. So they're coming back. Let's see. Do we have a commercial break or are we going right into it? That clock is ticking, baby. It's a beautiful night, my friends. Thanks for joining us here, watching the Watchers, covering this historic debate between the great J.D. Vance and the Tim Walz. The countdown continues. 2, 1, go!
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become Vice President of the United States, Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America Decides, the Vice Presidential Debate.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of
Did he get
defense
fired?
and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House.
Fired. They got
now,
fired.
the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together, understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Let's go, JD.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris.
Yep.
So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to.
Was
Nora?
that a fact check
Thank you.
from her?
Let's turn now to Hurricane
right?
Helene.
Kinda sounded
The
like a fact
storm
check.
could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Can you stop
Sure. So first of all,
please?
let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives.
Oh my
and I'm sure
gosh,
Governor
that's
Walz
terrible.
joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said, again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Who cares?
Thank you, Nora.
They're idiots.
We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters.
Like the
Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country.
Thanks to
what
Kamala.
do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you asked about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Well done. Smoke an answer. Smoke an answer.
Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things?
He wrote it down. Not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this.
Did she do anything on the case?
Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle. Wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs. DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. Yikes. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. No, because it gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens?
And will you murder them too?
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules. And it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim, Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. Happening? So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help. But most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico. You've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done.
Are they building
houses? This bill gets it done in 90 days.
Come over
then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Dignity.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Temporary protected.
Everybody gets legal status.
But thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990.
They turned the mics off.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process.
This is pathetic, yeah.
Nora?
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion.
Oh, that's nothing
How
for
would
them.
you pay
They've
for
done
that
that a few
without
times.
ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand.
Yeah,
so those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers.
Look at it.
Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there,
thanks for the tip,
teachers,
Tim.
nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? And the last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that.
All of them.
They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989.
Don't think that's
true.
But
Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year.
Wow, interesting question.
Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400. Town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect.
But
and I'm a
there or
knucklehead
not?
at times. But it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits.
Yeah, but
and then the people of Minnesota
were you in China,
were able
though?
to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything.
You'll say
many times.
anything.
I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Tim?
Governor, just to follow up on that,
let's go.
the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Just let it hang.
Thank you, Governor.
Let it hang.
Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump,
Dude's a liar.
unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump.
Easy.
I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record.
Yep.
But most importantly,
Buy your
Donald Trump
garbage.
delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day,
right,
you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says,
yes,
you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you.
Right on time.
Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather.
We're talking about the
Those
drive-through
are horrific.
abortions at the DNC.
Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights as basic as the right to control your own body is determined on geography. There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level.
Good.
I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know the Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that, too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all.
Do you support 9-month
freedoms for women
to
make their choices? And we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator,
apparently there was an abortion
First of all,
case,
Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience.
Everybody
we can be
abortions,
a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their health care decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
All right, so they're cutting a commercial break. Now, it has been a pretty 3-on-1 situation again. What we're seeing repeatedly here is them guiding Tim Walz, giving him guideposts, walking him through. Would you care to respond to this? Vance just said this. Would you like to respond to this? And how would you guide on this? And then they're fact-checking J.D. Vance. It's happened multiple times here tonight, and I'm glad that he finally called him out on it. But as you can see here, there is a debunk of this tragic death story of Amber Thurman, which is already here. And I want to shout out our friend over on Rumble, who is called Bones Mama. What's up, Bones Mama? Thanks for linking this for us. Says, this week, ProPublica reported on the tragic death of Amber Nicole Thurman. She obtained chemical abortion pills in North Carolina. After returning home to Georgia, she got a rare complication. She had not yet expelled all of the baby. She checked into Piedmont Henry Hospital to receive a dilation, whatever procedure, to remove the remains. There were delays in her treatment, her condition deteriorated, and she died. ProPublica reports that the state committee deemed her death preventable and argues that Thurman's delay in care were caused by Georgia's pro-life laws. Unsurprisingly, the mainstream media pounced on this tragic story because they're little death cult monsters. The New York Times, Slate, Mother Jones, People, Now, Tim Walz, numerous other mainstream media outlets, countless politicians and elected officials got in on the act. Nominee Kamala stated the same thing. But of course, the death was tragic. Like, we don't want anybody dying ever. There are aspects to her story that we simply do not know. ProPublica broke the story, says that an official state committee tasked with examining the pregnancy did call it preventable. However, a full review of the patient case is not public, so we don't really know. More importantly, as the Charlotte Lazier Institute colleague Dr. Christine Francis points out, Georgia's Pro-Life Heartbeat Act was not even responsible for the death. So the death was all ultimately caused by the abortion pills, right? Like, she got the abortion. She was in the middle of her abortion. She was in the process of aborting the baby. It was being aborted, didn't happen fully, and she had complications from the abortion. So it's not like she had an access to abortion problem. They're such liars. However, mainstream media outlets steadfastly refuse to cover the risks of these abortion drugs. The FDA's own labeling system says that 1 in 25 women will have to visit an emergency room after taking it. So she was one of them. Furthermore, research from multiple peer-reviewed journals show that chemical abortions have 4 times the complications of surgical abortions. Even so, the FDA has removed the safeguards over this stuff. Get abortions at the DNC whenever it is convenient. Unfortunately, the playbook is all too similar. They latch on to anybody who died, and they say someone's bleeding out in the parking lot of an abortion clinic or whatever. The media narrative filled with these lies, as you can see. So that debunked right away from Tim Walz, and it's pretty pathetic. And he didn't answer the question on that. Does he support the abortions in the 9th month? And if they don't, why can't they just come out and say that? Just put a cap on it. They can't, because there's no limit on abortion, because it's not even about abortion per se. It's about making women into a useful voting bloc. And we're back. Let's see. Are we back?
That I could do anything I wanted to do.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson on Person to Person.
All right.
Superstar approaching.
All right. So is that Usher? Is this a freak off show? What's going on here? CBS Mornings Freak Offs? All right. Now available on CBS weekdays. All right. So keep our eye on not watch that one. All right. Let's see. Are we coming back here soon? Waiting for the debate to start. Here it is. That's what we thought. All right. We're back.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there.
Yes, you are, Tim.
Do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is, okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it's only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety.
Got it.
I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent.
Much better topic.
There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers.
What is that? Is that cash?
And a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim.
What, Tim?
25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver is paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Nice.
Senator
JD.
Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
I have it.
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for a national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes.
Especially
we
out here
should
in
be
the West.
kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do.
Everything is
There's
federal
not
land.
a lot of federal lands
All
in and around
government's land,
Minneapolis,
not even
for
ours.
example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part
Where
of
are
this
they living?
problem?
Did they
Well,
bring
there's
a
a
house
Federal
with them?
Reserve study that we're happy to share after the
Supply and
debate. We'll
demand.
put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down
Where
on
are
the
they
connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you,
well,
gentlemen.
Figure it out.
We have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. You think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do. But I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that will be there. But look,
and
this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is... So you think the
individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Ask Pete Buttigieg. What did he say?
Well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in.
These questions are
Is President
wild.
Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation.
Weaponization of the DOJ?
After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors.
Yeah, I was rigged.
That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by 2 lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Nicely done.
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't.
He didn't.
140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag. Several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state Capitol grounds in St. Paul, and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties.
Yeah, what about when
the
they
only
burned
person
down
there
the
was my
whole
son
city?
and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police.
What about when they burned down the precinct, 3rd precinct?
That issue,
that Kamala
and Mike
wanted
Pence
out
standing there as
to
they were
bond them out.
chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was
With their fake
adjudicated
gallows?
over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win.
When it's a fair game.
That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents.
You're doing
already
it.
laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American
How many
history
federal agents were there, Tim?
that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power.
Why'd the
And
Secret
here we
Service
are
delete
4
their
years
text
later
messages?
in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
What was Kamala
Margaret?
doing outside the pipe bomb there?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads.
For 4 years,
This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this.
federal agents were there?
I don't understand how we got to this point. But
We
the
do.
issue
You
was
censored all
that
of us and
happened.
stole an election.
Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something. That's not censorship.
COVID
Censorship is book
conversations,
banning. We've seen that.
stolen
We've seen
election,
that brought up. I just
Hunter's
think
laptop.
for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's
Because of federal
inability to say.
agents
He is still
and
saying
Nancy Pelosi.
he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
Yes,
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is Where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
All right, so they're going to come back. They're going to do their little commercial break, and then they're going to come back. And this has been pretty interesting. So they're going to have closing statements. I think Tim Walz is coming up first with closing statements, and then they will call it a night. But let's see. We had some donos come in. Man, you guys rock. We had some amazing donos. So let's say what's up to our friends who are here joining us tonight. What's up? Ollie is in the house. Ollie, it's great to see you. Thanks for bringing in 5 new members. Welcome, Zenith, Christopher, Ike, Raymond, Aaron Stevens, all gifted members, courtesy of Ollie. Thank you, Ollie, for bringing some new friends in. Let's see who else brought some members in. What's up, Rick D? Rick D brought in 10 new members. Todd, Donkey, Twister, Skippy, Daughter, Uncle, Margaret, Cien, Pitchlock, Sean, all coming in. More coming in from Rick D. Whoa, Rick. Another. Nutter. Ben, what's up? Jill, Brian, J.A., Aussie, Walt, Daryl, Chaldeus in the house. Rick D just upgraded the membership. Thank you, Rick D, for doing that. Good to see you, Rick. Thanks for bringing in so many members. Steph is here. 7 months as a membo. Says we're 3 for 3 on debates with Govea. Good to see you, Steph. Let's go. It's been a good one. Rick D says, watching tonight on my new 40-inch monitor, baby. This is going to be epic. It's been a good one. Hey, James Hatfield. Thank you, James. James is here saying smash that like button. If you're here, we'd love it if you subscribed and liked this video. Rachel says, good luck, Vance. 7 months as a membo. 2 more till we get to a baby. Thank you, Rachel. LOL, epic Trump from Rick Donner in the house. Sharing that one. And Trump said he'll do an interview on 60 Minutes if they apologize, which we appreciate. This one from Rick D. What's up, Rick? Says Jack Smith, who's not a real boy, is famous for inventing new laws on his own, from Rick D. That's Jack Smith. Hey, Sony Wah. What's up, Sony Wah, over on Rumble? Thank you, Sony Wah, for the very nice dono, for being a membo on Rumble. We listen to you every day. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Sony Wah. It's a real nice compliment. I do appreciate that. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a membo on Rumbles. Thanks for the nice dono. We love you. Bruce Wayne, Batman, says Walz at the debate. I like horses. 8 months as a membo, Bruce. 1 more, and we got a full baby. Wendy Donnelly, Dottie's mom. Shout out to Dottie and Wendy, mama of Dottie. Bringing in 10 new membos. Thank you, Wendy. We got Tornado Sunflowers here, Loki Mischievous, Suzanne B., Heather Fullwire, P. Wilson, Cindy's here, Woozy, Will, Ryan, and Roland. Gifted membos, courtesy of Wendy Donnelly. Rick Donner is also sharing this one, which looks like a nice link that Kamala skipped a bunch of briefings, evidently. What's up, Annette? Welcome, Annette, our newest supporter. We'll see you tomorrow on the members only stream. Hey, new membos, we'll see you on the members only stream in the morning. Jack is here. Says, we saw this one, Jack. Great comment. Right out of the gate, JD is knocking this out of the ballpark. Very concise, answering the questions, very professional, very courteous, very focused. I was not originally fond of JD as the choice, but I no longer feel that way. Very impressed, from Jack Mack. Good comment. NY says, Walz took too much Adderall. He's almost pacing in his place.
My parents.
Shifting back and forth. And he was looking a little bit tired also tonight. He was kind of looking like towards the end, he was leaning on the podium a bit much. What's up, Jack? Says climate change. You know, I hate to be a conspiracy theorist here, but my whole perspective on climate change shifted when my brother told me about the Bouvet Island and the mysterious blob in the Atlantic. Check it out. That sounds awesome. Sounds like a rabbit hole that I would spend way too much time on. Can't wait to do it. Thank you, Jack. Hey, Janky Grandpa, bringing in 5 membos. Navy Styles, Brian Malone, Michael J. Callie Beals in the house. Tommy Christ, welcome. Thank you, Janky Grandpa, for bringing him in. We'll see everybody in the morning stream tomorrow. We got Art Pollard says Vance takes the role of leader from Walz, who follows. And I think you're right about that. We're back.
Welcome back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you.
JD.
Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Thank you, JD.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle.
And thanks for doing a terrible job to you, Margaret.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder,
Nora.
there are just 35 days until Election Day.
Yeah, you guys did a terrible job tonight. You should be ashamed of yourselves, and you should feel bad because you asked horrible questions. You were fact-checking when you said that you were not going to be fact-checking anybody. You created a structure whereby you were guiding Tim Walz through the questions, even prompting him. Would you like to respond to what he said specifically, this point and this point? And structurally, the entire debate benefited the Democrats. Why? Because there were a bunch of social issues in here. They were talking about guns. They were talking about healthcare, family, childcare, home prices. The list goes on and on. In all of those things, the Democrats get to come out and say, well, we're going to give you everything. We're going to give you $25,000 and $6,000. And everybody's going to come in and we're going to just make 3 million houses pop out of thin air. And you want paid leave? Here you go. We're going to give it to you. So the questions were structured in a way to serve the Democrats. It was wild to listen to them fact-checking J.D. Vance. It started right out of the beginning. I mean, we commented on it right when it happened. And they were asking questions like, J.D., how many women would you let die in cars from your abortion plan? And they brought up that fake case where the woman died in the process of an abortion. She was aborting a baby, died in the middle of it. Didn't die because of a lack of access to abortion. She was in the abortion. And it's part of the process that they even talk about in their, warning labels that people might have complications. That's what happened. But they always turn it into everybody's going to die unless you vote for Kamala. So the debate, I think, hit the mark that it needed to. J.D. Vance came out, introduced himself, was very competent. I think that the body language that we watched, J.D. Vance seemed like he was in total control of the night. Tim Walz was constantly, what's J.D. doing over there? What's he doing? What's he saying? What's he thinking about? And he looked a little bit less assured of himself. And on the policies, I think J.D. Vance did a great job articulating Trump's position and calling out Tim Walz on their failures, more specifically Kamala's failures. Now, the one thing that really hurt Tim Walz was that question about Tiananmen Square, man. That was a weird, spicy meatball that was just laying out there for all of us to enjoy. Okay, so did you go over there or not? He's like, not. Ugh. That was the one question that came up that was a disservice to them. But it was a good question because we have a lot of questions about Tim. He says he's done a lot of things, like carried weapons of war in war. Never happened. Claiming that he's different ranks when he never actually exited at those ranks. And so I thought it was good. Tim Walz is pretty good, I think, at communicating in a way that feels empathetic. He's not really saying much that is going to translate into actual reality, but he feels empathetic. He's looking at you kind of like with those squint. No, I care. No, we do. Don't you care? We don't want you to be suffering. Now, his, of course, party is responsible for all of this, but he's got a plan, apparently, and they're going to work their way through it. So, my friends, thank you for joining us. I know there's many places you could watch this debate tonight. We're very grateful to spend the time with you together here. Thanks for being a part of it. We had some great comments that have come in, and so let's say what's up to our friends. William Holiday says, when Walz talks, all I hear is the teacher from Charlie Brown. Womp, 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 womp. That one? How does that one sound? Womp, 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 something like that? Hey, William Holiday says, I asked the watcher community to pray for my family. I have family in Western North Carolina. They are alive, but they're cut off from the world. They're stuck there in their home on top of a mountain. Thanks, watchers. So, watcher friends, send some extra prayers to the Holiday family in there in North Carolina, and there's many others. We were talking about some of this morning, and it's just horrendous. So thank you for that, William Holiday. Jack Mack says, sorry for another comment, but JD placed that comment about the missing children absolutely perfectly. Tired of these biased moderators, though, no doubt. We got Rick Donner says, the length of the U.S. southern and northern borders combined is 7,500 miles, but Walz is claiming that 1,500 new officers will cover it. Really? Not. What's up, Rick D? Sending in a nice dono. Thank you, Rick D, for that one. No comment, but thanks for that. Glocky says, what's up, Glocky? Says FCBS. Says, why the double hockey sticks do Republicans even agree to go on these networks? If Republicans didn't go on these networks, the media would collapse overnight. Glocky says, hey, Rob, check Polymarket real quick. JD is soaring in the odds that he won. Art Pollard says JD equals leader Walz equals bureaucrat. Jack says Trump maybe didn't pay taxes, but he also didn't take a paycheck either. In fact, I think he's the only modern president who's come out of his presidency worth less than he was when he went in. And I think that's right, Jack. Like $1 billion in net worth. Janky says the Donald is living rent-free in their brains. Will Crump says, let's hear Walz explain his stolen valor. He didn't want to do that. We got Elf is bringing in new membos. William S., Sheila, Scott, Richard, Jay Nick is here, Jennifer, Stephen Hood, Christina B., Neil Nice, and Nana are all coming in. Don Goff is bringing in Anonymous, Jason, Bruce, and Mother of Papillions, courtesy of Don. Thank you, Don, for bringing in 5 new membos. Rick Bing is bringing in Hork, JH, Avex, Wild Horses, and Teresa McKenna. Amazing. And Sheila Poo is bringing in Sarah Clark, Sam Adams, Jay, Rebecca Glasgow, Jeffrey Jordan, all as new membos. Facts matter. Thank you, Facts, for the very generous dono. Says J.D. Vance is like Tom Brady coming in for Drew Bledsoe. Goats, baby. Goats. And Facts, thanks for the very generous dono. Thanks for being a membo. And you're right. He was good. William Holiday says Democrats are so full of good intentions. So is the road to hell. Just saying. Hey, John Libby says, thanks, Rob. I had a choice. Trump on True Social or Here With You. John, I hope tens of thousands of others join us here. Well, there were a couple thousand, but not tens. One day we'll have tens, John, with your support. We got Patty Rogers. What's up, Patty? Thanks for becoming a membo. Sheila says, has Walz even answered a question yet? I don't think so. CL, what's up, CL? Says, what is the restriction? What is it? We have NY says, no women is in jeopardy in the United States. The surgery of that woman who died in Texas was not because of a lack of abortion. I looked at the case. The Democrats are mischaracterizing a bad outcome. Rick D says, freedom to make your own choice except for the vax. Then you have to be punished if you don't do what the government says, from Rick D. Jack says, Amber Thurman died of septic shock due to taking the abortion pill. Delayed service is not the reason she died, and please stop calling it reproductive care, okay? Technically, it's anti-reproductive. Jean says, baby parts are worth lots of money. Sheila is bringing in 5 new membos. Catherine, IK, Swamp, Saga City's here. Sean Hayward, what day is it? Welcome. J-Man is bringing in, says, Tampon Tim reminds me of Iraqi Bob. There are no American soldiers in Iraq. Sheila is saying, hit that like button. Thank you, Sheila. Zach on Glass says, Tim shook his head about letting voters vote on abortion. We're 50 states. Enforcing a federal standard is the exact opposite of the pact our individual states made to unite. It's antithetical to our form of government. Yeah, if they want to pass a national abortion bill, just pass it. Get a bunch of people to vote on federal legislation, but they won't do it. Buffalo says, the debate is really awesome. I'm loving all the real substance, intelligent, mostly respectful, and getting to the point 80% of the time. I'd watch 2 more VP debates. Janky says, Timmy is lying. Rick says, wait, Harris is a hunter? BS, only thing she hunts is her credit card to buy from Tiffany's. NY says, Amber Thurman from reports was pregnant with twins. Multiple birth abortions are a total risk of their own. Rick D says, wait, Harris is a hunter? We had Zach says, did Tim say he became friends with school shooters? Chubby says, Walz is there taking notes as he learns from their policies for the first time. Glocky says, take a wild guess at how the government of Minnesota is able to afford all this stuff. Jester says, this is the most respectful debate ever. Here was one from Glocky. Jack Mack says, my sister lives in Minneapolis. She said that they had a relatively large and unprovoked property tax increase earlier this year. What's up? Rick is here talking about land that's being owned. William Holiday says, hey, Rob, you the man. You reminded me of a relative of mine who lived in Tombstone, Arizona. Hint is in my name. I'm your Huckleberry. Silver Umbrella says the pause has gone on for too long, so going over to movie night. Silver Umbrella says, thank you, Robert G. Thank you, Silver Umbrella. NY is talking about pre-existing conditions. Milo Phone Bill says, Tim Walz was in Hong Kong in 1989 during Tiananmen, so this was not true. Says he taught in a high school in China as part of a program, but he did not actually travel to the country. We have Jennifer says, as a disabled person on state insurance in Michigan, I'm not eligible to go to Mayo. It doesn't take my insurance yet. Walz wants government health care. We had Jigum reminding us to hit that like button. Thank you, Jigum, for the very generous dono and the very nice reminder. Sheila says, I call BS on the ACA. My coverage costs much more, but covers much less than when the ACA first went into effect. Milo says, this is not a good look for Tim Walz. Glocky says, Rob needs to do a meetup in the land between the lakes. And we've got NY. We had 50 membos coming in here from St. Chef. And man, we had a lot of donos coming in. So we're going to wrap it up here in just a couple minutes. But Joanna Bryan says, unfair questioners sided with Walz. Great job from Vance. Ella says, love that Vance is keeping them in check. Kelly says, officers didn't die on J6. Rachel says, Vance killed it tonight. 3-on-1 again. Happy he called out the fact checking. Facts Matter says, JD is going to close like Mariano Rivera game 7. Milo, what's up? BH Williams is talking about fire in a crowded theater. Glocky's got some memes. Jia Jiang says, great debate tonight. Thanks, Rob. Wendy, what's up? We had amazing membos, 50 membos coming in from St. Chef. Thank you, St. Chef, for bringing in 50 amazing membos and new membos. You know who you are. And so we're going to wrap it up there, my friends. Angel says, I hate that JD did not have a reaction to Walz. Johnny 5 locals. We're going to come back and we're going to follow up tomorrow with some locals comments because we got 1 minute left on locals. It's going to kick us off and we're going to leave it there on the night. Stan says, your commentary is why I only watch debates on your channel. Thank you, Stan. And so locals, friends, we're going to come back in the morning to finish up some of these comments. This old guy says, Rob, thanks for doing this. As usual, you got a whole lot of information in when I really needed it. And so, friends, we're up against the clock, so we're going to leave it there. Locals, we'll come back. We'll finish the comments tomorrow. Membos, we'll see you in the morning. My friends, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a heck of a stream. I hope that tonight you have the best sleep you've ever had and you make it a great night. We're going to come back in the morning to get into it again. Until then, when we come back here tomorrow, we're going to need to see you here so that together, with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Make it a beautiful night, my friends. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.